We are blessed. This place has been our home for 20 years. We moved to another place. We carry resonances, memories, and one of them is going to be with you right now. I feel deeply privileged to have Ashok Chatterjee with us, who has agreed to suffer us for, I think, 3 days, and to carry through this discourse through YouTube and other mediums to a larger audience. Jagdeep ji is India Art Fair. Everybody knows India Art Fair. And it is now in new, very capable hands to make not just, I'm told, India, but the entire subcontinent proud of its creative economy. It's no longer just India, I'm told it's South Asia, which is something that I was trying to, Neha used to constantly have dialogue with this, and I'm very happy that at least a few years back the idea of it becoming central to the entire subcontinent has come. But my profound respect for what you're trying to do to position the creative arts of this country in the world stage. And just to say why we are particularly excited is because you've created a platform in which I think if it became even more and more and more inclusive, which I know you've been trying to do, and last time there were puppets, there were traditional mica paintings, there were some areas where, but as you will see when you do come and spend time here, there is a huge repository of skills with the most amazing approach to contemporaneity that you would expect from a country or subcontinent as vast as ours. It needs positioning. And ours is literally the tip of the iceberg at the moment because we've only been working in 12 districts, while this is, India has 628 districts. So although we have one Indian art fair, but if you let a few of those come, we hope that we'll have enough for 628 art fairs. Yeah, that's 2 a day every year. So but and Ritu, I've had the fortune of introducing earlier, and again a scholar, a committed documentation is an awful word, a passionate believer in putting down what is fast disappearing in front of us. And thanks to her, it may not, because we have the right to recall. We can keep looking at it, keep informing ourselves, keep pressing ourselves with the urgency of some things that are slipping away. So Ritu, Ashok, Jagdeep ji, are you going to engage us in a conversation? Is it?
I think that's what we'll try to do, a conversation, but focused on the theme. And I assume that you wanted somebody from Ahmedabad to pick up the theme, because the theme for this evening is where's the money for art and culture.
And it's in Ahmedabad. And it's in Ahmedabad.
Well,
no, Ashok, we have not picked you up because you. I think you should take this one. We haven't picked you up because you're from Ahmedabad.
Well, anyway,
certainly there's a lot of.
I am from Ahmedabad, and I think that's not a bad place to be from when you're discussing an issue of this kind, because we're in a space, of course. I think the reason why we're sitting here is because all of us are concerned about this extraordinary collection, which is surely the only one of its kind in the country. Priceless, not just in financial terms, but in terms of what is behind here. And since I've spent a big chunk of my life in design education, I can see just from that perspective that a collection of this kind is not available anywhere. We have craft museums, all of them facing some kind of crises, but we don't have a design collection quite like this, in which one can see the entire process of how our traditional heritage moves into contemporary society, moves into new applications, new users, new buyers, new markets, without losing their integrity. So it's a hugely important resource. And our subject is, for discussion today, is where is the patronage going to come from? Where does it come from today for culture? And what do we have to do to build support systems for art and culture in the coming years? Since independence, we have always looked to the government and to government schemes for patronage. But that source of patronage is now diminishing. And the so-called market system has moved in, and we are told that we should now be more self-reliant. We should not expect the taxpayer to be doing what the taxpayer was doing before. And you know the situation that is already there within all our cultural institutions, museums without heads, craft museums being closed down, like the one, the Guru Sarai Dutt Museum in Calcutta, being told that they're not going to get any more grants, crises everywhere, struggle for support at Dakshina Chitra in Chennai that you may be familiar with, and even in Ahmedabad, which has a fairly interesting track record in culture. But I'd just like to say that there's one really important thing about Ahmedabad which may not last in Ahmedabad, but it's still there now, which is, at least with some people, a very strong sense of trusteeship. That what we have is not for ourselves, but is for future generations. And I think that's the kind of spirit that one requires here at C52 South Extension 2 at this moment, that we're looking for organizations, individuals, institutions who have that sense about the future. So let's start our discussion with perhaps a few observations, and I'll ask Ritu to start, on the patronage system as it has come in the last 70 years of Indian freedom. Before that, we had a patronage system which could be more clearly identified by ruling families, temples, and so on. That changed with independence. What do you see as the trajectory or as the transition in terms of patronage in this so-called sector of culture?
Thank you, AC. That's a difficult question, and I'm glad that this is a discussion, because our thoughts will evolve as we converse with each other. But when people built in the old days, they built for 1,000 years. And it is so sad that when I look back on these 70 years across this vast country where we are spoilt by our riches, I can really think of very few examples that we can hark back to and say, look at what they did, we should try and follow them. And I start actually with Ananda Kumaraswamy. He had one of the greatest collections that was put together. The books that he wrote and the books that he collected, the art pieces that he collected, and he traveled at a time and he understood Indian art and craft and culture. He was one of the first people actually, which is why he is so revered till today. But when he offered his collection to the government of India, it was refused. My goodness, look at what we lost. And that was a time when we were building the nation. We were building institutions. And we lost one of the greatest treasures. Stella Kramrisch, her entire collection went to, I think, the University of Philadelphia. Yeah. So we have lost more than we can imagine. There is barely a suitcase that doesn't leave this country without a beautiful shawl, a chola statue, or something or the other that is going to be sold outside the country. So when I look around in the last 70 years, I actually see that, yes, we did set up some institutions, but I also see that within those institutions lay their very seed of destruction. And we were just talking earlier about the Calico Museum, and you said yourself, nobody knows what's going to happen next. But why does nobody know? It is actually a treasure. It's a treasure for the Indian people. How marvelous that it belongs to a family, but why isn't it known as to what will happen? Will it go into a suitcase and be 10 years later we will find it at a Christie's exhibition, provenance unknown? But this is the sad truth. And therefore, I mean, there was NCPA, there was the Tatars, and we always turn to the Tatars. Oh, we should ask the Tatars. But that's one foundation. 1.4 billion people, and we have one foundation that everybody turns to. What a shame. I mean, we should actually hang our heads in shame. And I would love it if someone told me that there is some example, and I would love to be set right. I know there's this amazing Museum of Man in Bhopal, but it is completely under the Ministry of Culture. And for some reason unknown to myself, I was one of the appointed as on the governing body for that short period of time that they have, 4 years or whatever. Every meeting was held in Delhi. We never went to the Museum of Man because Secretary Culture never had the time to go. And the poor fellow who was the director at that time, a remarkable anthropologist, and he would say to me, Rituji, this is the worst punishment I have ever received. He was just blasted all the time. I mean, there was no support given. So, when we look at schemes and programs of the Ministry of Culture at Sangeet Natak Academy, there is no support for institutions. There's always that added thing that you have to be eminent. But how do you get to be eminent? I have a daughter who's an artist who will never be eminent unless we support her, unless she lives at home, because she will then be imminent, because she will have to take up a job. So we don't support anything except eminent. But at the end of the day, I feel these conversations are happening. We are thinking. And therefore, in our thinking itself, there is hope. And I wish I had a lot of money, Rajiv. I would have not even paid you 1 rupee. I would have begged you, and I would have done whatever. But it is so unfortunate. But I'm sure with Jagdeep's help, there is somebody out there. And because of these conversations, I know things will change.
Well, we're of course here in this Rajiv space, but for a little while, let's use Rajiv as the catalyst and think beyond that. Jagdeep ji, what has been your experience in your time that you've spent in Delhi in looking at the contemporary patronage systems, if any, that exist in the world of art that you deal with?
Well, firstly, I would say that although the group is small, the actual base of buyers is small and patrons is small, they are actually a very committed and dedicated group. Everybody has scenarios where they might have find circumstances where they may be wealthy at one point and able to support the arts, and at some other time they're not able to do that. And so the first thing I would say, it's really important to appreciate the amount of time, money and effort that the patrons put into the art. But the main thing for me is you need to grow that base of people, whether it's for dance, for performance, for artworks. It's actually extending that group of people. And compared to the population, and if we look at the number of patrons, they're a small group. So from what I always think about is this: you have to look at all the different potential routes to what you want to achieve. So wealthy patrons are one group, and it's a group that needs to be extended, and also to engage with that group. The main group is always, things only have value if a large number of people are interested in them, whether or not they can afford them. So whether that's theatre performance, whether it's literature, whether it's contemporary art, it's antiquities, if people appreciate those things, if the general public appreciate those things, they have a value to people who might be thinking of things as an investment or something that's worth keeping. Small example, in Britain, where I've lived most of my life, is there's a reason why the governments come and go and they change political colours, but the system for supporting arts continues and is to some degree consistent, is because the British public, taxpayers, young people support it, and they turn up, and or they want more people to turn up, but they want to engage with those activities. And while that is there, people feel that they must keep spaces free and they must find places to keep them free, but also to provide grants. Now, that doesn't mean that everybody, if they set something up, is entitled to a grant. So I'm going to bring it back to India a little bit, because one of the things I learned when I was working on projects and fundraising from whatever sources, here, whatever sources do exist, if you're going to look to them for funding, you have to make the best of it. You have to actually be good advocates. You have to put together the best proposals. One of the things that we briefly, I think, mentioned on email was about what skills do people need to actually raise funds. So it doesn't matter if you're applying for a government fund and there's a form that's 100 pages long, or you're asking somebody who's a collector or a patron of another museum to support you, or some of these public-private partnerships. You've still got to have the advocacy. You've got to build a little team that can deal with all the different competencies that are needed. And you have to be realistic, because one of the things it takes patience, and it takes intelligence, and the most difficult thing is not getting downtrodden about things and not feeling disheartened about, for example, even this museum that we're in today. Today I saw the collection of books, and the value, never mind the cultural value, which is at a very high end, is the historical value, the fact that all those books, somebody briefly mentioned, well, somebody might be able to buy all those books and put them back together, but it's once you've got a collection, it goes apart. You can never create what's in that room. You can never get the collection of those Chinese texts that are in that room. You will never have some of the books that are very academic and some of the books that are very cheap and cheerful guides to culture. You'll never find that again. So this is something we've been talking about quite a bit. So sorry to go off on a tangent, but so for me really is looking at all the different approaches, and actually it is going to be people who are new to the arts, who are the younger generation, who have tools that they know how to use, like digital promotion and various activities and education, to think of ways of how you can raise funds. I mean, here's a great example. Sustainability is the buzzword everywhere you go in the world. How do you create something, for example, a theatre troupe, and then how do you make it sustainable so that it doesn't last for 2 or 3 years and is wholly dependent on donations from one person? So sustainability that's the challenge. How do you work it out? You have to look ahead and say, we have a current plan which is about what we need to get done right now, which may not be as big and as fantastic, but will allow us to survive and actually build an audience for what we do, and be patient. And if that takes 3 years or 5 years, you have to have that patience. And then at the same time, you have to run a separate plan, which is about, in 100 years' time or 50 years' time or 10 or 20 years' time, how do we achieve that, and how will be sustainable? What will be our income source? What item should we be spending that income on? Does that mean we have to open a shop? Does it mean we have to have something else? You have to look at commercial ways of doing things, and the best way to do that is to look at examples, successful examples, but also look at examples where people have gone into a commercial activity to support the public side, but it works, but perhaps it doesn't bring through as much as it could do, and how that you improve. So for me, if you can't build something and it's sustainable for 10 years, it's going to be very difficult. 100 years and 10 years, when you start something, is the same. It is the same. You want it to survive your lifetime. So for me, that is where the younger generation, you don't have to be wealthy to be smart and to have good ideas and to have advocacy and to be able to use the tools that you have to promote the arts and culture of India. And also, you don't have to be very contemporary. You don't have to be conceptual, because you need to start where people can understand, as opposed to putting yourself in a position. I love contemporary art. I love conceptual artworks, but I have to say, if I have to read a 30-page document to understand why there's a chair next to a cup, I'm not interested, quite frankly. So it's about communication, and it's about the stretch. You know, you can have antiquities, you can have heritage, you can have contemporary theatre, you can have classic theatre. So it's really about picking one area to focus on so that you're not taking on too much, and then really thinking and building around that, but also doing it with a couple of people who, this is why collectives can be very, very successful. There comes the point, like any startup, the collective has to move to a place of governance, and it has to have more people, and it has to do different things. But people have to believe in that themselves. There'll come a time, if we get success, that it won't be good enough for it just to be the 4 or 5 of us to do the things that we started out with. People have to have the intelligence and the good grace to say, what we've created, we no longer have the ability to make sustainable or to grow, and then to look to people who might be able to do that for them. Sorry, we're talking a bit of...
That was very interesting, because you've made some very important points. One thing that you have mentioned, which never comes up when we talk about patronage for the cultural space, is young people. It's always assumed that we're looking for support from somebody who's already had a lifetime, or their forebears have had a lifetime of putting things in the bank, and you look for that. So I think this is very important. You bring up another issue, which in a way responds to what Ritu brought up, which is that in this situation where sometimes we despair, it would appear that in the areas of culture, entrepreneurship is not a bad thing. And we have found repeatedly in the cultural space that for some strange reason, artisans have no problem with entrepreneurship. They have been entrepreneurs all their lives and for generations. How do we move to a situation where we bring young people into collections like this, not necessarily to buy, but for their minds to be opened, because they are tomorrow's patrons, right? We haven't succeeded in doing that very well. After many years of effort, the NCERT developed what I'm told is a really good curriculum for crafts, which is an option for any school in this country. But only 4 or 5 have picked it up. And why have they not picked it up? Because they say there are no teachers trained to conduct this course. So it's sort of a vicious circle. How do we get young people to be interested? The second thing is that with my own experience with entrepreneurs, and Rajiv I'm sure has much more than I have, the younger generation of artisans have absolutely no problem with entrepreneurship. They want it, and they want it now. They want to learn e-commerce, they want to learn computer skills, they want to learn English, they want to be able to handle a smartphone smartly, but there's a generational gap, and we need to be able to fill that. What do you think we should do for these things?
Well, this is something I have grappled with also, because in my... Rajiv, thank you, I'm so sorry. In my own work, which I have now... we have ourselves not been able to build in an income model. This whole thing about having an online encyclopedia, until we were hacked, we got more than 5.8 million hits per year, which is phenomenal for such a small area. And 5 of us work from morning to night putting on data, but we couldn't convert even one of those hits into rupees Anna Spice. I just didn't know how to. Because the strange thing that has happened to the online world now is this expectation that everything should be free. And we then said, okay, let's try and get a shop going online. And I looked at what the Victoria and Albert Museum did. I looked at the British Museum, because I felt that we may be sitting in India, but in our office we have always set our standards at international levels. I've never looked at any competition within this country, because we are a global world. So we have always looked at the highest standards that the world has to offer. And when we set up our little shop, we found we were hugely successful. But an immediate reaction in the office was, we have of course 70,000 practitioners who are online, and you can access them directly. Anybody you want, whether it's a Paithani sari or a dokra. And one of my colleagues said to me that we are buying 3 saris from this person. Let's remove his name from our list. And that was the day we stopped the shop. And I said no.
Why?
Because my colleague felt that somebody will go to them directly, which is what our whole aim is by putting out these 70,000 people, and we will lose that 3,000 rupees we are earning off it. And we shut the shop the next day, because for 14 years we had worked that we are going to do this job, and one day we will have finished the encyclopedia. And now I can say it still continues to be a work in progress. So I haven't myself found a way to earn any income out of it. So I grapple with this greatly myself, number one. Secondly, that same issue that you all have brought out, who does one hand over to? And I loved what you said, that we have to have the good grace to say, this is now bigger than me. I don't have the tools anymore to run it. I need to find somebody who I can give it to and then do something else. And the person who said this to me beautifully was Uzramma. When she handed over Dastakarandra to Shama and to Annapurna and the rest, and I asked her, I said, so, how often do you go back and how do you feel? And she said, I don't want to be like a school teacher who's retired and keep going back and troubling them. So I don't go back at all. I only go back at the time of the board meeting. I trust them to take it in whichever direction that they wish to. And then she went on to do so much more, because she was so cut off from Dastakarandra, and set up a decentralized cotton trust, and now Malka, and then I don't know how much more. So I hope to have the good grace. I hope to be able to hand over. And yes, there is this huge problem of the younger generation. And I have so much faith in them, because I feel they have better ideas. They know how to mix commerce with art, which I don't know how to do at all. And I have faith. And I know there's someone waiting there to will knock on my door and take over Craft Revival Trust and the encyclopedia from me. But I'm sure it is an issue. And I think, AC, you have an answer here, because the Crafts Council is managing it quite well. And I know you've had issues, and I know you've had to guide them many times, but many of them, the handover is happening very well. So perhaps you could also give us some insights without that very interesting smile.
That issue of institutions which have to move from one set of founders, if you like, to another generation, But I think what we're talking about here is creative talent to find a support system, and a support system which uses the advantages that we have now of things which my generation could not have dreamt about. The communication revolution has taken place, but other things as well. We often bemoan the present day and look back at the past, but certainly for me, I can say that when I came out of college and was looking for a career, I don't think any of us even contemplated a career like what Rajiv has made for himself, or which so many of his chelas and others and students from my institute have made. This is just unbelievable for us. So although there's a lot to be worried about, I think we also need to see the opportunities that have also come with the threats. What we are speaking about now is, the topic was given as where's the money, because that's a very important question for the future of the Asian Heritage Foundation, of everything that we see here. But beyond this foundation, we seem to be talking about the need to, outside of government, building up ways in which creative talent can find support. And just now what we're talking about is management support. Management is not the answer to everything, but entrepreneurship and management seem to be what is a critical factor in the next phase of the life of this great collection, or that of young people who are doing things in the field and want to. Your own sanghas, which you've had all over, in many of the ideas that both of you have discussed have been incubated in this space for 30, 40 years. Rajiv was the first one to draw the attention of the government of India to something which is now globally acknowledged everywhere except in our dear country, which is the concept of creative and cultural industries. Although in 2005, there was a Jodhpur conference on creative and cultural industries under the United Nations, in UNESCO, UNDP, World Bank, they were all there. And the Jodhpur consensus on creative and cultural industries was signed in this country, in the city of Jodhpur. But ask anyone in the government if they know about it or whether they have factored this in to any government program, and you'll get a completely blank expression. Rajiv was sitting in the Planning Commission for 2 years trying to promote this concept. He produced an enormous documentation, but I don't think anyone in positions of authority went through that document. And I think there's some barrier that we are facing on this that is very difficult to understand, perhaps partly because for the generation that grew up after freedom, we took all this for granted. We thought that it would be inconceivable for anyone to imagine an India without all this as a permanent part of our mental, spiritual and physical landscape. And then a few years ago, when we in the Crafts Council of India were wondering why government schemes, quote unquote, were so difficult, we were told, forget it. You represent a sunset industry, and you are irrelevant to the future of this country as a global power. Those were the words used in Delhi to us. How did this happen? Where did it come from? This is the only society in the world which has won its freedom with hand production and the crafts at the center of a struggle for political freedom. How could we forget the relevance of that experience? Sure, we've now moved into another world, and that was 70 years ago. But in our own consciousness, why have we switched a button that hasn't made this collection central to the future of this country? Why is that happening? And I don't have an answer for that. Is there any clue from Britain?
One thing I say to people here all the time, I say it to my own team when we talk about the India Art Fair, people are looking for an excuse to come to India. And so it's, so any reason they can find to come to India, they'll come. And one of the things is, people from outside of India don't dream about coming to India to go to the shopping malls. They dream about coming to India because of its culture and its heritage and its creativity. That's why they dream about coming to India and the beautiful land that it is. Not because they want to go to shopping malls, not because they want to do things that they can do in their home countries. So that's one thing to think very carefully about, and that is something that more people need to understand. Well, the other things, Ashok, when we were talking, when you're speaking earlier, is everybody in this room needs to remember, especially younger people, is depending on what age you are, if you're not already a voter, you will become a voter. And it means that whether or not you've got a great deal of money or you don't, and you're a working person, is you still have the right to vote, and you still have the right to influence. So it's something that you should never kind of shy away with or give up on. Is something that you can always use as a means to your vote. Going back to this idea of that commercial aspect, is there's a thing about the word entrepreneurship. If you go on a website called LinkedIn, you'll see that there's about many millions of people who call themselves entrepreneurs. Now, entrepreneur is like the word legend. It's something other people say about you. It's not something that you call yourself. And it's interesting because to see you call the artisans here entrepreneurs, because that's how it should be. They don't describe themselves as entrepreneurs. They don't sit there thinking about that. They think about what they do and what they're making and the quality of it and the pride in which they make the things that they do and the skills that they use. So for me, really, there seems to be a skills gap, a workforce development gap, because not everybody will have the beautiful skills and have the training that some of the workers we've seen here today have. So it comes back to this thing: how does a younger generation or a younger group of people who are very committed to the arts do something? It's not everybody within the group has to be creative. Not everybody within that group has to have the skills to paint, to perform, to write. And they need to have a mix of skills. Somebody needs to have the skills which are in relation to the marketing and the promotion. Somebody needs to have the skills to make sure all the governance and all the basic things are dealt with, and the duty of care of dealing with members of public, or bringing them to performances, or bringing them to spaces to see works, to make sure they're safely installed. Somebody has to do that. And you can actually start that as a collective or on a small scale. Look at some of the most successful residencies and events that happen in like Code, and activities taking place outside. So the most important thing is that people get opportunities to learn. Because even with handing over to the next when you're handing over the work that you've done, and somebody else or a new team is coming in to run it, you need to find people with those skills. I have a mixed team. It's really important to me for the India Art Fair that we have people who are passionate about art and creativity and culture. That's very important to me. But the most important thing is that I need members of the team who know how to sell, because we're an art fair and we make our income from selling space to galleries who come in and bring the art and sell. We also have to ask for sponsorship for activities, so that we can create the spaces that we do, that we can create an experience. I also need somebody who knows how to manage, contact and manage patrons and international curators, Indian curators, carry out outreach across a diverse group of people. So these are the type of skills that people need. Not everybody needs to have the same skills, they just need to have the same passion, which is for arts, culture and creativity. And then I need somebody who's very good at counting. Every rupee counts, who's very good at that, and is also very good at understanding how we make the best of our commercial activities that we make sure we pay our taxes, that we make sure that if there's opportunities to make more money because we are selling our creativity or what we have very cheaply, that they're able to help us with that and how we monetize what we do. So I think that's something that people need to think about. I think it's fantastic to be surrounded by people who are passionate about art. It's fantastic if that group is full of creators, curators, writers, a whole mix, or performers, musicians, a whole mix of things. But when you actually want to do something, you have to think before you start. And if there's something that isn't working, when I came and joined the India Art Fair last year, the thing that struck me was I'd been coming to the fair for a couple of years, and in 2017 there was no reason for me to come back because it was pretty much the same. But when I was working on a South Asian project, I realized outside of that art fair there was so much creativity and so much culture, so many opportunities to interact, that I suddenly realized that it was fantastic. But it was not, in the short trip that I used to make to Delhi, I wasn't getting it through that one-stop shop. And so I had to think long and hard about that. So some of the things we did was we decided that Delhi is full of jewelry and clothes shops and textiles, so we wouldn't sell those items within the fair. We would focus on art, and we would focus on textiles where they cross over with art. We also looked at making sure that the quality was raised, so that we didn't just have galleries who were prepared to pay lots of money, that we selected what we thought was the best range and diversity of galleries and diversity of price point. So these are the kind of things that I've been able to implement, because otherwise the India Art Fair, quite rightly, it was a fantastic thing that Neha Kirpal started, and she ran and sweated with it for many, many years. But it reached a point where it wasn't the one-stop shop, which it is becoming, which I hope it will become in the next couple of years. We have the best galleries, we have crafts in there, we have works coming in from not just India, from Pakistan, Pakistani artists, Bangladeshi artists, Sri Lankan artists. But everything is a step. Now 2019 fair is going to be another step in the work in progress. So I don't have a great deal of patience, but even I am learning patience is step by step. We made some mistakes last year. We didn't have a bookshop. So this time round we'll have a bookshop, because we know people who can't afford to buy the art would like to have something to take home, even if it's an Instagram photo, if it's a postcard, or if, it's a book. One of the things that we're looking at in our bookshop is to bring some international artist books in, but have them heavily discounted. We're also going to speak to our Indian publishers to have heavily discounted books, so that people can afford to buy them, because £35, so 3,500 rupees for a book is very expensive. So sorry to bang on about the fair, but I'm just trying to explain that we need people who are thinking about advocacy, focusing on that. You need people who are focusing on marketing. Marketing and communication and PR is the most important thing. And you do need somebody who's going to focus on where is the money going to come from. Every day when they wake up in the morning, they need to be worrying about that. Where is the money going to come from? Telling colleagues we can't have such an ambitious thing that we're doing right now because we can't afford it, but we can do a small thing, and next year our plan, so that we can find where the money comes from the next year. And then, like I said, a diversity of sources, some commercial enterprise, some patronage from individuals. And wherever possible, it's always worth trying. I sometimes say to people, why don't you ask, or why don't you apply for this? And they say, no, we were turned down years ago. And I always say, well, it'll take you half an hour to apply. Apply again, and then you can come and say to me, that's not a possible source of income because I've been turned down. And also, actually, in small amounts of money, people can contribute to things. One of the things that we found is the newer collectors, we've got groups of people, younger people coming through who are now collecting. They recognize also, I have somebody who works for me, he saved for a whole year, and she was able to purchase a piece on her own. She didn't need any advice. She found something within her price point, and she purchased it. And she may not purchase anything else for the next couple of years, but she's invested in that small piece. So one of the things we do is have a diverse price point, and we encourage people to ask and not feel too shy about asking. It's the same for performance art. In the theatres, and I was a trustee of the Almeida Theatre in North London, and it was really important to have ticket days or ticket seats, tickets that were priced at lower prices, because actually that's the audience you want. It's not necessarily the audience that can afford the expensive tickets, but you need that mix to be able to manage financially. And so that's something that's very, very important. When I was a trustee of the Wallace Collection, which is a fixed collection, which is actually held by the government, but it has some government funds, but has to raise money and look after it. What we found is that a lot of the public who'd been visiting the Wallace Collection over many, many years then started donating small amounts of money because they didn't want to lose the privilege of having this free space that they'd been visiting and enjoying for many, many years, or artists who'd been inspired by what they'd seen in that public space, so that when they made a little bit of money, they put something back into it. And actually, that was a great source for raising funds, as well as people who left small amounts in their wills. I mean, that's something that works in Britain, and even in Britain and other places, it's very, very hard to raise funds. If you asked anybody, I've been a trustee on various boards, and I can tell you right now, it's not just a problem here in India, it's a problem everywhere. It's how you tackle it is the issue, because you have to tackle it in a way that suits the society that you're living in.
Thank you very much, Jagdeep ji. Yes, well, just Jagdeep ji has to leave in 15 minutes because she has another appointment. And I just wondered if any of you have questions that you would like to address to her. The rest of us are here. Yes, please.
Just a suggestion, just like you're planning to have bookshops at the art fair and have things at different price points. I mean, why don't you consider, just a suggestion, since you are sitting here, to have a kind of a stall or a booth where you have craft that is crossing over into design and art as a part of the art fair, because one, it will create a very good point of diversity. People are inundated with the art thing, and it becomes a very interesting crossover thing for the art fair to do. And also it becomes a catchment area for the art fair to tap into for future this thing, and at this point nobody is doing that. I think that could be a way.
Thank you. Any others anyone else? Any other question for Jagdeep before she has to go? Raji, did you have some questions?
Just wanted to find out about one of the problems we're having are really merchandisers, to how to cost art craft. In art, there are systems that have come into play that actually help us ascertain the cost of an artwork. In our field, where this crossover is very difficult, because we are committed to this being a stakeholders owned brand. So the women who are making something which fetches them a small amount of money, and we will go and sell that in the market of this art space, we may be able to sell a lot more, but in some sense we devalue. Now, can we put the money of that craft back into a system that supports the activity? Because that's where the money is going to come from consumers that are going to buy. But the problem I'm having, and that's who actually costs. How do we break? We've tried this many permutation combinations, but if you go around the exhibit right now, the most frustrating thing is that we don't know how much it is. And it's very varied. A sari could be from the cost of its labor or what it's with its materials and its skills and its unique design, and yet it's still only a handloom. Now, my question is not a question, sometimes it goes into rambling observation. But I just want to tell a story which was said in your session, that when Rita was saying she was trying to sell her handloom sari, and somebody came up and said, cotton, handicraft, 15,000? Why do you want that kind of money? Shobha Day was nearby, and she saw immediately, being Shobha, that lady had a very expensive. Can you tell me how much your bag cost? And the lady was so embarrassed because it's about 2.5 lakhs or something, and it was machine made in Taiwan, probably not even in the back rows of Paris. So she left very quickly. Now, branding is of course an issue, but we are having real crises at the moment. We are not able to get trained people who can add up the costs that make a craft product, see what the market can pay, and put it out there for the consumer to be able to pick up. And of course, plowing back of the extra money, that's not a problem. That's not an issue. But how do we cost for crafts in this very divergent market, where I think for the arts it's little set as a...
Just to go back to the young man who spoke earlier, one of the reasons that I want the art fair to be an art fair and not an art and design fair is the first thing we need to do is to get the fair to a point where it is the art fair, and it is the South Asia art fair. So that is my core objective. Now what we do in relation to design is that we can, through crafts and design, we have a section called platform, which shows some of the work that's being owned. Some of it, we have the Delhi Crafts Council, and then we have various organizations, and actually they are some of the best booths. So what it is there's an opportunity to make a statement and to market. And then what we do is, and we're doing more of it this year, is it's important to us that when people come to Delhi, and a lot of people organize things around the week that we have the India Art Fair, when people come to Delhi, we don't want them to spend 4 days at the art fair. We want them to go to the design places, to go to the crafts places, to go and see those places for themselves. And last year, for example, we had experiential theatre, we had some other activities. This year we're increasing that. For example, and this is where it's quite heartbreaking, is for this forthcoming fair, we would have made this space our a collateral space, so that people could come and learn about other things other than just the visual arts that we have at the fair. So for me, the fair will always be the art fair, but what it will do is that it will adjust a little bit to promote other forms. So like I said, performance that we have. Performance arts is very different from theatre, music and what have you. So we've been working on that, and we've got some things that we're working for going forward. The other thing that we do is, wherever possible, if anybody tells us, we try to promote it through our social media. And we have a very strong following within India and internationally, which we try to grow. And so that's what my colleague Gautami does. So it's something I'm always thinking about. But first of all, I need to make it a one-stop shop where the art is concerned, and then we can look at whether or not diversify. So I'm trying to bring it back to what it should be. Now, just briefly on what you were saying about costing, we've been talking, Rajiv, just now about skills. And what it takes is, it doesn't take a committee of 15 people to work out how to cost something. What it needs is somebody who does that job, has done it in relation to something, selling products, in whatever capacity, who has that skill and has that experience, to volunteer or to give some advice about how to cost products for the different kind of customers that come. Because it doesn't matter if somebody sells their product locally for 300 rupees, they're perfectly entitled in a different space or in some other way to have a price for somebody who is able to afford it, to have a version of the product that they can sell for 3,000 or 30,000 rupees. Because one of the things mentioned earlier is, even when I came in, I saw amazing things. I looked at those prices, and I know that people will have come, bought those up, and then sold them through their own businesses for 10 to 100 times that price. So it really, I'm not an expert, but it comes down to skills development and workforce development. And one of the things I would say is there are a lot of international cultural agencies in Delhi, and I might get told off for saying this, but they do support a lot of activities in the arts. And what those cultural agencies do is the focus tends to be very much on there being an exhibition. And then when it's not an exhibition, what tends to be is they focus very much on curatorial discussions and discussions about colonial identity in the arts and various things. So if it were me, what I would do is I would look to those international cultural institutions who fund activity. I would look to them to fund workforce development, give people some. I think it's great to have conversations and discussions, but if they're putting the money in and they're organizing, they can bring in experts. They can also pay for experts to come in from within India. They don't need to be international experts. Something like you've just mentioned, Rajiv, somebody who has experience and can get a download on how the process and everything works, it would probably take them maybe 48 to 72 hours to come up with some options that then they could work through. But they must also be listened to, and their expertise has to be heard. And, you know, the element that they're looking at it from a commercial perspective, if the objective is to have sustainability through income, you have to let those commercial voices be heard, and I'm sure they'll be sympathetic, because they're trying to help, not hinder.
I just wanted to talk about two things that both you said and what AC said. And what you said is that every morning or whenever you say, where is the money coming from? And then what AC said is that the government, the planning commission, the the minister of textiles at that time said, and the Minister of Culture, that you all are a sunset industry. So at the end of the day, where is the money coming from? And obviously it's not coming from government, because government is interested in livelihoods. They are seen to be interested in livelihoods only and not in culture and art, because like you said, they haven't yet realized that it is vanishing before their eyes. The realization has come to us. It will come to government 10 years later. But where there is hope is that amazing CSR policy that the government has initiated. And I liked another point that you said, that people will only put their money and their interest in something that is valued. So we obviously haven't done our job in making ourselves valued. So we have to therefore create value. And what you said about being active on social media, why are there, it's a lovely audience, but there should have been 5 times more people for this very important conversation. So I think all these things actually link together, that we need different skills. We need someone who's great with PR and communication, someone great with pricing, someone who knows how to advertise and build value, and someone to be able to write a proposal to get money from CSR, because when they see value being created, everyone wants to put their money where it has been put already. If they have done it, hum bhi kare. So I think this actually calls for another discussion.
It does call for another discussion.
It's true though, one of the things that I said when I came, what really struck me as an outsider coming in was that people outside of India had more respect and felt the culture. As somebody like me, you know, is incredibly proud of my Indian heritage and of Indian culture and various things, is because, because I also see it on an international scale, how it compares with elsewhere. And I think that's it. You know, when somebody said, why do you need international PR? And I said, actually, because if we get PR internationally, maybe people in India will start sitting up and looking, and particularly people who are wealthy and able to contribute and who are patrons will look more carefully if they feel that people outside of India feel that it's a value, and that we don't treat ourselves as second-class citizens and second-class culture and second-class art.
I think, thank you very much for being with us. and we hope we can continue this conversation with you. Yes.
Just keep